Hello and welcome to Backstage Pass. My guest today is the world-renowned industrial hygienist, Monona Rossol. I want to read for you just a couple of things that she has accomplished over the years because I find this absolutely fascinating. Monona is the president and founder of Arts, Crafts, and Theater Safety, which is a not-for-profit corporation dedicated to providing health and safety services to the arts. She's also the safety officer for IATSE Local 829 of the United Scenic Artists. She's lectured and consulted in the US, Canada, Australia, England, Mexico, Portugal, and the United Arab Emirates. She's authored 9 books. They all deal with health and safety issues in the art and entertainment industries. And she writes and publishes Axe Facts, a monthly newsletter covering similar issues. She is a trainer and a building planner. And then on Thursdays, what do you do? Welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for asking.
It's a pleasure and an honor to have you here today.
Oh, I would just like to make sure that we understand that my opinions here are my opinions. The positions that I have here are not the union's policy. It's not also the policy of ACTS. You're talking to me personally, and these are my personal opinions.
Right. And those personal opinions are the ones we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd like to start off talking about where you come from. I mean, some of the biographical stuff. When you were growing up, you were a performer very early on. We were talking earlier before we started taping, and you had some interesting stories to tell.
Yeah.
So if you could give us kind of a round out that experience.
Yeah, my parents were vaudeville performers, and we booked out of Chicago. When I was born, at age 1, I was a prop in my father's magic act, replacing the rabbit and other things. And then by 3, I had my union card, and I was a performer, doing everything. Back then you did everything. You sang, you danced, you did acrobatics, you stooged, you did a magician, whatever they needed. So I had a very good upbringing as far as being on stage and performing and getting to know the business. And I guess that you could say that if you are raised that way, you learn the only thing that you need to know to be a success, which is the curtain goes up at 8. And you're ready and you're there. Right. I think it's the kind of discipline that we're missing with a lot of young people today. So I thank my parents for that much,
right,
that they did give me that kind of background.
Right. So when they called places, you were there.
It's absolutely.
Right.
It's not negotiable.
Non-negotiable deal. Great. You're a singer?
I minored in music, actually, since I sang all the time anyway. And of course, I never told anyone in college or in any of the schools that I attended ever that I was a performer. People don't remember that back then, theater people were trash. I mean, you paid to see them, but you certainly wouldn't invite them into your home. And if you read the papers today, we're still trash.
We're still trash, I'm afraid, yes.
But it was something that I just never brought up, so that when I auditioned for lessons and things like that, they thought, well, my goodness, what a nice natural voice. But I'd been working for years. And so I minored in music for some of my degrees. I got 3 different degrees. And I did all the performing courses at the University of Wisconsin, where I went. And then when I came to New York, I was trying to get into teaching and safety and a number of things, but I fell back on my business, and I picked up the trade papers and got an off-Broadway lead part, and I never had a problem getting jobs.
Right.
So it was a very good gift that my parents gave me.
Yeah, terrific. I'd like to talk about your schooling for a second because, frankly, I looked at all this and it's extremely interesting. You have a Bachelor of Science and a Master's of Science and a Master's of Fine Arts.
Yes.
They all came from?
University of Wisconsin, Madison.
Right. And the various degrees and minors, what were they?
Minor in music, minor in math.
Okay. And?
Well, the reason is really kind of strange.
Well, that's
because you see, I had somebody who was willing to back me for medical school when I entered the university. But I did not understand discrimination against women because I'd never seen it. You see, as long as men can't sing soprano, I didn't see any discrimination, so I was not prepared for what happened. So I took pre-med, got all A's, and expected to be welcomed into medical school. And we got this lecture right away saying, you know, the courts have decreed we have to take 10% women, but we don't want any of you here, and we're flunking half of you out after the first semester anyway. So I gave them the sign of the finger and left. But I figured, well, now I can graduate in 4 different ways. I can graduate in zoology, math, physics, or chemistry. So I majored in chemistry, minored in math, thinking I will then become a chemist. After I got that degree, they quietly told me that as a woman, they weren't going to put me in any kind of PhD program. So I did the PhD research for the boys and made money doing it because I was a research assistant.
Right.
And I used that money to put myself through art school. And I thought there'd be no discrimination there. Well, that was the worst of all. I mean, we were told that there are no significant women painters because our brains are defective and we don't process color and form the same way as men. They wouldn't even let me into studio art for 2 years because they said, women can teach art. You can be in art education, but you can't be an artist. I mean, it was, you have no idea. Now,
right.
That was the late 50s, early 60s.
I was just going to ask you to put that in context. Yeah.
Unbelievably bad.
Right.
And so I just persisted anyway. But as I was going from the chemistry department every day to the art department and back again, it dawned on me I was seeing the same chemicals in both places.
Right.
Solvents, acids for etching and things, pigments, dyes, minerals.
Right.
And I thought, you know, in the chemistry department, we at least have rudimentary ventilation, eye wash stations, goggles, other type. And here, these artists are throwing this stuff all over them damn selves.
Right.
So I started doing my graduate seminars in the safety, and people walked out. They said it'll interfere with our creativity to know this. And I figured death and disease are not going to do your creativity a whole hell of a lot of good. Right. So I just persisted. And I also learned that if you find anything that is obvious and true and it makes people really mad, you have found a really good thing.
You're on the right track.
You're on the right track.
Okay. Well, great.
So it ended up a career because when I got to New York, I met other people who believed the same way I did. We set up various groups and things, and it all worked out.
To keep with the recurring theme from your earlier academic careers, what was it like as an industrial hygienist, as a woman coming into the entertainment industry?
Oh, it was similar. But now, you see, we had all of these women's lib things, so now they don't actually tell you, they just don't let you in.
They don't let you in.
It's much more polite, but the results are quite the same.
Right.
I become very irate when I'm training and there are these young things in the audience from college who say, oh, I'm not a woman's libber because, you know, that's all passé, everything is all settled now. And I thought, you're blind, deaf, and dumb, lady,
right.
if you aren't seeing it, because it's still there. And you have to keep fighting. You just can't give this up.
Right. But you didn't fight it with the, for lack of a better word, the more traditional sciences, but you continue to fight it in the arts.
Yes. By trying to do what art should have done all along, which is understand their materials and understand the process, right. And probably try to respect the artists by keeping them damn alive. And so, of course, it was a natural step then to do the same thing in theater because you're using the same paints, the same pigments, the same processes, and then you're climbing up into the rigging and falling out. I mean, there's just wonderful, wonderful hazards there. So it was a natural to then move into that area
right.
as well.
Right. So you're a chemist, you're an industrial hygienist, and you're an artist. Now, how do those three play together? How do they all fit?
Well, most industrial hygienists need a lot of chemistry because we're dealing with air quality, we're dealing with safety in handling chemicals, what kind of personal protective equipment to wear in order to keep the chemicals out of you. So the chemistry fits with industrial hygiene very well. And of course, the artists are using some of the most toxic chemicals going.
Right.
Because as soon as you put the word art or any specialty word on any paint, it is now exempt from the consumer paint lead laws. So you can see lead, cadmium, chromium pigments. You can see all of the biggies, the really bad metals,
Right.
and in the pigments there. And in the early days, I mean, we try to use safer things in theater now, but in the early days, those pigments were in huge bins sitting in the,
Right.
in the theater shop in a form that if you spilled them on the floor, I mean, it should cost about $100,000 to abate that mess.
Right.
So, I mean, we were working with some very dangerous materials back when I started.
Right.
They're a little safer, except that we've invented some new things that are just as bad now.
I was going to ask you what the progression was like. I know in other aspects of the entertainment industry, there is some higher awareness and a progression of safety consciousness. How does that work in the costume shop?
Well, in the costume shop, we have one of the most dangerous groups of chemicals going, and they're called the dyes. Mm-hmm. Most of them have never been studied for toxicity. And the difficulty in the United States, and not in other countries, by the way, but here in particular, we have a legal system based on the premise that chemicals are innocent until proven guilty. So the minute you have no test data for a chemical, it is now even capable of being labeled non-toxic. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, as a chemist, I can tell you that most of those dyes are in classes that, if they're ever studied, will cause cancer.
Right.
We're looking at the anthraquinones, the azobenzene and benzidine dyes, and so on. We are looking at bad stuff.
Right.
In Europe, they have something called a dye directive, which lists a series of carcinogens, and if your dye can break down to give any of those carcinogens, then the dye without testing is a carcinogen. Common sense. Right. We don't have that rule here.
Right.
So your costume people are working with some pretty hairy things. And very often they look at the package and they look at the safety data sheet in the United States and it says non-toxic. And they think that means something. Right. So it's a process now of educating to explain the difference between the way the rest of the world sees chemicals and the way we do here in our business-oriented culture. Right. So they should have the kinds of protection that they would if these were very toxic, because they probably all are.
Pardon my ignorance in this area, but I'm familiar, at least hearing about aniline dyes. Is that part of that group?
Yeah, that's the old
showing my age
name. Yeah, aniline is a benzene ring with a NH2 group on it. That's what it is. Okay. But that two of them stuck together is benzidine, and you have to look at the structure. Right. And unfortunately, we don't train our people to even know that they have a structure and how to look it up. So that's one of the things that I try to teach people in the courses, because that's their protection. In Europe, you would expect, someone who's working with a chemical to know how to look it up. And you don't have to be a genius to be able to identify groups, even if you're not a chemist. Mm-hmm. So I try to show people that and make it clear to them. But the fact of the matter is there are only 6 food dyes in the synthetic classes. One of those is a low-level carcinogen. And they're using thousands of dyes. Figure it out. If there were safe dyes, we'd have a lot more food dyes.
Right.
We don't.
Right.
When we test dyes, we find bad stuff happening.
Sure. You mentioned teaching.
Yeah.
So I'm carrying this a step further. How do we teach, or what's your process? I mean, I know you teach a lot of classes. You have an ongoing thing at Amherst, UMass Amherst, right?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the problems. When I went to high school, we got an education that is about on the par with what most people have when they leave college today in terms of technical things. That's one of the really sad things that has happened. When colleges became a business, that put the student as the client in charge of the institution. And so what we have is not the most educated population we've ever had, which people like to say. We have the population with the most degrees,
Right.
but we do not have the most educated population. We have people who specialized in kindergarten and know one little field, and they are totally ignorant about everything that's outside of that field so badly that they can't read labels and really understand them. You give them a material safety data sheet, and there's absolutely no way they would interpret more than 2 words on the entire thing.
Right.
That's what we have. And so it's really a remediation that we have to do. We have to go back to the definitions. We have to really start from scratch and build it in order for them to protect themselves. Because you have not only the costume people working with chemicals, but look at your special effects people. And look at the painters, and look at the people who are making the props with these new plastics, some of which are really horrendous. We have fog, smoke. We have incredible issues. We're the only industry that deliberately pollutes its own air.
Right.
You know, so it's a dangerous business overall.
I had a friend who took one of your classes, and apparently you started the class with the comment, "Nature is trying to kill you."
Mother Nature doesn't love you.
Mother Nature does not love you. God, I'm going to write that one down.
Yeah, because no culture since the beginning of man has ever been dumb enough to believe that if it's natural, it's somehow safe. I mean, our chimp ancestors knew that the majority of the plants and trees on the face of this earth are toxic or outright poisonous.
Right.
And they have piles of dead chimps all through history in order to find out which leaves to chew on, which fruits, in what season. Eat the rhubarb stem, leave the leaf the hell alone. It took millions of years to come up with all of that. And now all of a sudden, if it comes from a plant, it's safe. Plants are surviving because they're in chemical warfare with each other and with the environment. They make their own fungicides, their own pesticides, their own herbicides, their own medicines, hormones, food. They're busy. Any single wild plant makes more chemicals than Dow ever thought of. And we suddenly think that they made them for us? Come on. So we don't understand. We really don't get it today. You have to not consider the chemical origin at all. You know, toxic chemicals can be manufactured by both God and Goodyear.
Right.
Okay?
Okay. I'm not sure that God would appreciate the comparison there, but that's okay. When I was doing some of my research, I came upon an article where you were doing some work with a T-Rex at the Field Museum in Chicago. And that just looked fantastic to me. What was that about?
Well, I was their consultant for safety for about 11 years. And that was when they managed to purchase the T-Rex Sue, I think they called it.
Right.
Was the biggest purchase at that time. And of course, when you buy a dinosaur skeleton, it's got to be dematrixed, which means you got to take the rock around the actual fossil off.
Right.
And you have to do that very carefully to not harm the fossil itself. It's usually done with little grinders and Dremel-like things, and of course that rock is going to contain some bad stuff. That's got to be silica in there, is one of your primary things, but most people don't know that dinosaur bones, for the most part, are very hot. I mean, they really kick off a lot of radon. Many of them replaced the calcium in the bone with uranium. So those dinosaur bones are hot. They've got silica, and you've got to grind the stuff off. And they wanted to have exhibits both down in Disney World down in Florida and in the Field Museum itself, that people could walk by and see this process occurring. So I reminded them that, you know, people who come to see museums are not just people. Some of them actually know something about occupational safety and health, and somebody is going to blow the whistle if they see conservators hung over in the skeleton and snorting silica. So we had a very beautifully done set of little laboratories with flexible ducts that came down right to where they were working, and so on. It was also then, in my estimation, a good way to tell the public about the issues,
Right, sure.
and to show them how a laboratory should look,
Right.
which made me very happy.
Yeah, I would think, at least from my perspective, that it would look better that way too. That there was
Kept it cleaner.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was nice. So they would have a row of people who were, what do they call them, paleontologists,
Right.
very carefully grinding this stuff off, and with the ductwork and all of that, and the big torrid collector and all of the rest. So it was really very interesting setup, and it was fun to set.
right, and you didn't receive a lot of pushback on that. I mean, that was a relatively easy process to get them to do that.
Yeah, that's why you always bring up what the public is likely to say. It works
Yeah,
wonders.
okay.
Because at first, you know, it's the same in the museum community as it is in the theater. Get the shot.
Right.
You know, get the show on the boards, get
Right.
it done.
Right.
And so very often the safety kind of comes in secondary. So that's really been my job more than anything, is to remind people that, yeah, you know, that isn't just rock, that's free silica
Right.
that we're snorting there.
Right.
So it slows the process as far as they're concerned, but it makes it safer for everybody.
Sure, sure. You have a, shall I say, reputation for going into a venue or a university, you know, whatever, and pointing out the error of their ways. And
Yeah.
I've heard more than once people who have been a little concerned that, you know, they know you're coming next week or whatever.
They clean up just before.
They clean up just before. And my assumption is that you appreciate that kind of a response.
Yes and no.
Yes and no?
In one particular instance, the maintenance people wanted to clean up before I got there, and they knew they had a mercury switch in the basement with about 3/4 of a pound of mercury in it. It was a big boiler, and so they were, just before I got there, they were taking it to throw it in the dumpster, if you can believe that.
Really?
And they dropped it. And we had 3/4 of a pound. And I didn't have a license to do the cleanup, but the city that we're in, which will remain nameless, I called the hazmat people, and they said they had a plane off the runway at their airport, which will also remain nameless. And they said, "Lady, unless you are drowning in the mercury, don't call back." Oh, no. So I had to run a mercury cleanup in this particular situation. So there's cleaning up before I get there is should at least be done safely and carefully. And it helps sometimes to come in and see the way things look.
Well,
without.
Yeah.
So
well,
I know what the problems are.
Yeah, and I know in my business, when I do inspections from the rigging systems, there's a tendency for people to clean up before I get there. And you're taking many of the symptoms away, hiding many of the examples and the hints that I get. You've just sucked them into a vacuum cleaner somewhere. I assume the same would be true for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd much rather see them in action and see what's happening at the time. So
Right.
it's nice if you can come in almost unannounced. And that's one of the nice things about the union, because you see, as a business rep as well, they can't keep me off.
Right.
So if OSHA came to a film location or to a studio or whatever, the employer literally can say, "Go back and get a warrant. We're not ready to see you now."
Right.
But they can't say that to me if we've got even one worker.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a nice thing. We can get in when we need to see what the problem really is.
Mm.
And that's, I think, what's one of the driving forces, because we have a lot of good safety things going on in film and in theater now.
Right.
And it is, the unions are really the drivers
Right.
for that.
Right. And unfortunately, a lot of the safety procedures that we have in place now are the result of something bad that happened before.
Oh, I can't tell you how many bodies are
Yeah.
buried out there.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that seems to be the way that we learn things. Let's switch gears for just a second. You live down in the West Village?
Well, it's technically West Village, you're
Okay.
right. It's right on the corner between NoHo and Soho
Right.
and East and West Village.
Right.
I'm on Thompson between Bleecker and Houston.
Still a great neighborhood? Or is it
Well,
changing?
It is a great neighborhood now. There was a period in the 70s and 80s where it was not. I mean, you could walk the entire length of Thompson Street and never be out of a crime scene. They were tough times. But now it's quite a nice neighborhood, and we actually love it. And I'm rent controlled, so I'll be there till there's a tag on my toe. And we're in the 6th floor walk-up.
I was going to ask you, a 6th floor walk-up.
Oh, we
huh?
love it.
Right.
Nobody comes to visit. We've all by ourselves. It's just the way we want it.
I was going to say, though, but, this is the way you stay in shape, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
You don't need a Stairmaster. You just need to get the mail.
Ah, perfect. Okay, going from living downtown New York City to a more somber event, you were one of the, as I understand it anyway, you were one of the people instrumental in convincing the city to investigate the toxicity of the air after 9/11.
There were a lot of us working on that.
Okay.
And yeah, it was a terrible time. I can be proud to say that ACTS formed an alliance with the New York Law and Justice Project, Environmental Law and Justice Project. And I taught their lawyer how to take a sample, and I have a relationship with one of the labs that run asbestos and lead and other things. So we got our own samples and had them run and did a press release on September 22nd. So we were the first people to say, this stuff is full of lead, asbestos, fiberglass. Oh, there was huge amounts of fiberglass and bits of glass in there. And people are breathing that. I mean, come on, what do you expect? And I did the first radio broadcast on the 17th of September with Leonard Lopate. And they didn't have a studio down there because they were too far down, so it was a rented studio, and I did it by phone. But we at that time said, this is going to be really bad. This stuff, you should not be breathing this. And a number of us did all kinds of things, going to various public meetings and so on. We just were not listened to. It was a very, very tough time, and there were a lot of us. I also went out to Fresh Kills, where they were sorting through all of that mess and debris and dust and looking for body parts and bits and pieces of stuff. And taught them the protocol, because there were artifacts out there. There were things that were going to be in the museum. I was working with the Smithsonian consultant at that time, and they were going to exhibit burned out buses and burned out taxis and things. Plus there was a Rodin, and there were a number of sculptures that were damaged.
Right.
And so conservators were going to have to work on this stuff. So we set up a protocol for how to clean and how to protect yourself and so on. So, gosh, we also trained in almost all of the firehouses down there, because the firefighters didn't get the kind of basic training that we thought was necessary to understand the issues about the dust.
Right. And eventually you received a better reception?
Well, let's face it, now everybody accepts it. But,
Right.
you know, I don't think we ever received a good reception. There was just always pushback.
Right. Now that we're seeing the
When
results of
when
that.
the people started to get sick, then it changed. But
Right.
it didn't change until there was evidence.
Right. Okay. You mentioned Fresh Kills earlier, and I just want to clarify that that is a location, not an act.
Oh, I see.
It is.
Yes, it's the landfill. Remember, it was closed. It was one of the highest points on the eastern seaboard because it was trash on Staten Island.
Yeah.
And now they had to open it because there was tons and tons and tons of trash from the 5 acres of buildings that were pulverized.
Right.
And so they were taking it all out there, and the FBI was out there going through everything before they would put it into the ground, so that, you know, they made sure that they got what they needed and so on.
Okay.
So it was a tough time, and of course some of the people who worked out there, even though they were suited up, the FBI did a better job of protecting their workers. They were in Tyvek and respirators and so on. But here, Giuliani was rah-rah-rahing, and everybody had the respirators hanging around their necks instead of on their faces. And they really just wanted to get Wall Street open, I guess, in a very short order.
Yeah,
and they just did not protect themselves as they should have.
Okay. Thank you for doing that.
Oh, well, anywhere I can annoy people, I'll be there.
You had mentioned earlier that you had someone who was going to put you through medical school. But you had come from this performer, family and performer background. And I'm not sure, I don't see how you bridge that gap. I was curious how that happened, how you went from performing to medical school.
Yes, it's absolutely a story I've never told. What happened was, when we were in Madison, we ordered our groceries from a place called the Sunshine Market. And the man who owned the market delivered them. And his first name was Jack, which figures because my husband's name is Jack. All the important people in my life were named Jack. And he watched me, and we used to chat. And he knew that I was rather smart, because I just was. I was very verbal.
Right.
And when I said I was going to go to the university, he said, if you go through medical school, I'll put you through. And I thought, come on. He said, no. He said, I'm a good Jewish boy. If I have a doctor who will take care of me and my family, I will have made a good investment. And we literally made a deal, and he did help me, because my parents threw me out at 17. So I had to be on my own, and it was nice to know that I had this backing and I had help, because I did not get it from my parents.
Right. What a great story.
No one's ever asked me that, and I've never said that.
I'm glad I did. It's a great story.
Jack
Thank
from
you.
Sunshine Market.
Right, Sunshine Market. We should go back to Madison and see if they're still there.
Oh, I'm sure not.
Yeah, you never know. So let's take that and let's move the calendar forward a little bit and talk about the early years when you were that voice crying in the wilderness, trying to get the artists to, be more safety conscious. You didn't immediately become, that person instilling fear in everybody's hearts. Let's talk about the earlier years, kind of getting to that point.
Yeah, there is a difficulty, again, for women in particular, because there's this feeling that we're not assertive, that we can't really make changes, that we can't express. No one ever said that I couldn't express myself. That's probably one of the things that I've always been able to do. But it makes enemies for you when you're in this culture that doesn't want women who are assertive. So it was a difficult haul. Again, I was very lucky. There was a man named Tom Cutter who was a ventilation engineer, and an industrial ventilation engineer, not your HVAC guy.
Right.
This was a very specialized guy, and he taught courses in industrial ventilation, which I attended and learned, and he helped me a lot, because I do my planning for buildings has to do with setting the specs for ventilation, primarily that and the safety equipment. And I also ran into other industrial hygienists. And back then, the way you became an industrial hygienist was to become a member of the American Industrial Hygiene Association, which means you have to work 5 years in the field, and then your work is examined by 2 people that are already certified. And if you meet their standards, then they propose you for full membership, which is exactly the way I got in. Now, it's more common that people will go to school, and they will get a degree in it, and that they will then take a very serious group of certification tests to become certified industrial hygienists. I was specialized long before that, so I'm an industrial hygienist and a full member of AIHA, but I'm not what's called a certified industrial hygienist, in that I don't have some of the areas of specialty that they do.
Right. Right.
But they don't have the ones that I do because
Right.
I teach them.
Right, exactly. So you mentioned a couple of people in the industrial arena. Who in the entertainment area is out there? Colleagues, people that you work with? Are there people out there?
You really hit, that is really the big problem. I am, as far as I know, the only professional safety person employed with any union in the entire country in terms of theater and film. That should not be the case, because I can tell you Disney and Paramount and Sony and all of them have their industrial hygienists sitting in their main offices. And they sometimes come and fight with me because they want to do something that I think isn't safe, and so on. If the producers have these high-powered people, so should the unions. Because where your bread is buttered has a lot to do with what your professional opinion often is. And we should, in the unions, have a lot more people like me. Almost every branch of IATSE and SAG-AFTRA, it definitely should have an industrial hygienist or 2 or 3 who can step up and make sure that that venue is safe.
Right. Well, here's hoping that some of them are watching this video.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping to train some of them at my course at UMass Amherst.
There you go. There you go.
Yes.
Do you do this on your own? Do you have assistants?
Well, with the course, what I've done is I literally set it up, and I'm going to endow it. I've put $600,000 of my own money aside. When I croak, that goes just to support that program. So that means I can annoy people even after I'm dead, which is nice. But it is the reason it's taking a while to set up this endowment is I have to make sure that the course teaches exactly what I want it to teach. Because again, once you set something up in a university, it becomes part of their money-making schemes, and very often it gets watered down. And this one I'm going to make sure it does not get watered down, and that the actual content remains. But once we have two types of students. One of them are theater technical people, and this is great for them because then they can do their job much better, much safer, and be able to understand a lot more about their materials and their equipment and so on. But I also get usually between 2 and 4 industrial hygienists in there who know the basics but don't know theater and art.
They know the industry, sure.
So those people really are prepared to take over slots like mine. And so this will be the 3rd year coming up that I will be teaching this. And so we're slowly developing a pool of people that I can now suggest as consultants other than my damn self, which is really the way I want it to be.
Right. I mean, I understand the 6th floor walk up and all that, but you know, we do want to see if we can get somebody to come along behind you also.
Absolutely.
Yeah, understood. You mentioned the endowment and these classes at UMass Amherst. Can you expand on those a little bit? I'd like to hear more about that.
Well, anyone who's interested, if they have a science background or at least an interest in science, and they have technical theater background or technical art background, or bless their hearts, they are industrial hygienists. If they want to contact ACTS, which is Arts, Crafts, and Theater Safety, we're very easy to reach. If you know my name, you can just Google that and it'll come up, or Arts, Crafts, and Theater Safety Incorporated will also get you there. And once you button on the email, which is still the same, CompuServe, which is one of the first email programs ever, you can reach me. There's still 12 of us, I think. And I will give you the information on how to apply. And hopefully this little performance that I'm going to be doing, I am doing a little one-woman show at Feinstein's, and I'm going to use the proceeds to try to get some scholarship money as well. Now, you should be deserving. If you've got enough money, hey, pony it up and come on down. It's not that much. But we would really encourage people, because the more people we have technically educated about safety and OSHA and EPA, on the set, in the theater, in the shop, the better it is for everybody in that place.
Of course. You had mentioned that you're looking for more industrial hygienists to be. So, correct me if I'm wrong, you're looking to take those people who have the training in industrial hygiene and
teach
lead
them what the craziness we do.
Exactly.
So they understand,
Right.
you know, our
Right.
processes
Sure.
and the types of equipment we use to monitor the air and what's in an air and what a squib is
Right,
and all
exactly.
of the things they have to learn. Otherwise, what has been happening is they get hired, they come on the set, but they don't know what they're looking at.
Exactly. Yeah. Is there anything happening like that on the university level in this country?
No, and that's one of the big problems.
Yeah.
And under the OSHA regulations, they're supposed to be doing training, technical training on reading safety data sheets and the safety and all the rest. But your big problem is that most theater departments do not have enough money to have the right ventilation and the right equipment and to do the training. So the reason I teach it at UMass Amherst is I was the person who set up the specifications for the ventilation in the building that we teach it in.
Right.
So we can literally take field trips and look at the way the ventilation is set up and how it should work.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's a big problem with universities.
Right. You mentioned that you design the the ventilation, excuse me, in that building. You do that elsewhere also, right?
Oh, I've done over 80 buildings, but most of them are disasters because I write a really good report. I have all the specifications for what should be done, and then it's handed to an architect who's never been trained, and then they give it to a contractor who is an HVAC guy, and this is just, it all goes downhill.
Yeah.
So I have gotten some really good awards. The Boston Society of Architects gave me a design award for James Madison University building. One of the buildings I did in Laramie at the University of Wyoming, the art building, which is gorgeous. You should see it.
I have. It is indeed gorgeous,
Yeah,
yes.
that got the AIA Committee on the Environment Award. That means it's one of the top buildings for environmental design in the world for that year.
That's awesome.
So it is stunning. It is stunning.
Right.
So, you know, occasionally I win one.
Right.
But most of the time it goes in the toilet.
Yeah. Yeah, I perceive to be something that can be value engineered out of the design.
Yeah, everybody's got a way to save the client money.
Right.
And you see, the whole concept is wrong. Because when a university wants to do a building, what do? They find a donor.
Right.
And then they have a competition between architects for a concept. Now, the whole point of the concept is to be so cute and so gorgeous that the donor is going to want to put his name on that because it looks great. And then they cram the safety in the concept.
Right.
And I tell them, no, design the ventilation and then build a building around it.
Right.
Because you really need to go safety first. And then, but that is not happening except in these few cases.
Right. Well, hopefully we can make that happen a little bit more often.
Nah.
Yeah, I can.
Sooner or later, something will happen.
Right. So where do we go? I mean, what are you going to do in your next, after Thursday?
Well, make sure that the course gets, the fourth edition of the Artist's Complete Health and Safety Guide is coming out. I'm going to update the theater book. I'm going to keep that technical information current and up to date and trying to keep that information out there. We're going to get rid of the squibs. We got a lot of projects going.
Right.
So we'll try to make it safe where we can.
Right.
And again, I have to thank the unions because without that support, this would never be happening at all.
Yeah. From an industrial hygienist standpoint, from a chemical standpoint, I guess it's more important. Can we clone you? Are there any regulations against that? Is there any, bad things that we would run into that we have to be aware of?
I got lots of DNA here. You're welcome to a chunk of it.
Earlier on, you mentioned that you have a one-woman show coming up in December. Now, I realize that this show will happen before we get this video out there. Unfortunately, I would have loved to have been able to get it out there to help you plug it. But I want to hear about this show because I think just the whole idea of you doing a one-woman show at this stage of the game is extraordinary and very, Very important.
Well, it wasn't quite planned that way originally. I've always been interested in very, excuse me, very early show music and some of the stuff we sang in vaudeville. And it's just not done today. So I had already started working on a little plan just to hold it in a little 50-seat black box somewhere.
Sure.
And I mentioned it as I was being driven home from a union training, and one of the union members and board members, Emily Gant, said, well, I'll produce it. So I thought, well, if I don't have to bother negotiating with the little black box and dealing with all that, that's nice. So I said, fine. And the next thing I know, this is now being held at Feinstein's Posh Club.
Right.
And it is big. And there is all kinds of, there's graphic designers and directors and some people, and it's going to be a big deal.
Right.
And I get to have a PowerPoint along with it, like I'm training. I'm going to teach about this music, and I'm going to sing a lot of it. And I used to work clubs here, so I've got some really kind of A stuff that I'm dusting off, and it's going to be a lot of fun. The money is going to go to scholarships for the course at UMass Amherst.
Right.
So it's all working out very well. And this music, well, these are not things that people are used to. I had someone ask me, what is your song list? And I said, there's no point in my giving it to you because you won't know most of them. You won't know what I'm talking about. And the union publicity said the truth, that I'm not for show business always trying to give people what they want. I'm going to give them what they definitely think they don't want and change their minds. And they're going to love it. Right. And so we're going to go into some really old stuff. And I have some unpublished Harburg lyrics because I knew Harburg. Mm-hmm. I've got a lot of comedy songs that just don't go unless you do a setup.
Right.
And I'm going to have a lot of fun doing it.
Sounds great. Just remember one thing. The curtain goes up at 8.
In this case, it goes up at 1.
Oh, afternoon show.
Yes, so they can make their call.
Oh, sure. So everybody can make
it's a
their evening calls.
Sunday brunch and performance, so they can make the call.
Okay, terrific. Looking forward to it.
I am too.
Okay. You were talking about your 6th floor walk-up, and you mentioned when you were discussing the no need for a stairmaster, you mentioned we. So who is the we in this?
We is me and my wonderful husband, Jack.
Another Jack.
Another Jack.
Okay.
And we met there was an old vaudeville man here in New York who was putting together variety shows and playing clubs. And my husband was booked as the George M. Cohen act because he had a good little routine that he did. And we met backstage. Uh-huh. And we just sort of knew. Mm-hmm. So he's still with me. We've been married for 30 years now. That's great. And he's the love of my life. And he's 92 and still gets up the stairs, still full of vim and vigor and life and funny and kind and a wonderful person.
Oh, terrific. It sounds like a wonderful thing.
The best time of my life.
Excellent. Monona, this has been great fun. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate your time and coming to speak with us.
It was lovely being here.
Thank you.